You think being empathetic makes you emotionally intelligent. It does. You notice what others miss. You feel tension before words are spoken. You sense when something's off, even if no one says it out loud. But here's the uncomfortable part. Those same strengths make you predictable, because while you're trying to understand, someone else is testing. While you're giving the benefit of the doubt, someone is mapping your reactions, and that's why certain people can control you without ever raising their voice. No threats, no pressure, just subtle moves you don't see coming until you're already adjusting yourself. Stay with me, because the part of you that feels like protection may actually be the easiest part to use against you. Let's talk about how empaths lead with understanding, not defense. You don't put up walls right away. You put up curiosity. When someone crosses a line, you don't immediately call it out. You pause. You wonder if it was intentional. You tell yourself there might be a reason you don't see yet. That pause feels mature, but it creates a gap. And that gap is where influence slips in. Instead of setting a boundary, you start negotiating internally. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe they didn't mean it like that. Maybe I should wait and see. Carl Jung captured this pattern when he said, "We cannot change anything until we accept it." Empaths accept first. They analyze later. And during that time, the situation keeps moving without your consent. You also tend to explain yourself more than necessary. When you feel tension, you try to smooth it out with clarity, reassurance, and patience. You think you're preventing conflict, but what you're actually doing is revealing how much pressure it takes to make you adjust. Once someone notices that you respond to discomfort by accommodating, they don't need force. They just need to repeat the pattern. You weren't trained to protect your position. You were trained to preserve connection. Jung warned about this imbalance when he said, "The most common illusion is that of thinking one has already done enough." For empaths, doing enough often means understanding more, explaining more, giving more time, not realizing that understanding without limits slowly turns into self-erasure. You don't lose power all at once. You give it away in small, reasonable moments, each one feeling justified until the pattern becomes invisible to you. The next thing is that you confuse emotional awareness with emotional control. You're highly aware of emotional shifts. You catch the change in tone. You notice when a pause lasts a little too long. You feel tension the moment it enters the room. That awareness feels like control. But it isn't the same thing. Emotional awareness means you sense what's happening. Emotional control means you decide how much access it gets to you. Empaths often master the first and skip the second. So when pressure shows up, it doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be uncomfortable. A subtle disappointment, a quiet withdrawal, a change in warmth. You feel it immediately, and your body reacts before your mind does. You adjust your behavior to restore balance, often without realizing you've done it. Carl Jung warned about this exact gap when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." For empaths, that unconscious reaction is emotional reflex. You respond before you choose, and once someone sees that your sensitivity triggers quick adjustments, they don't need arguments. They just need to shift the atmosphere. That's how control becomes invisible. You think you're responding naturally, but you're being guided by feelings you didn't stop to question. Emotional control isn't about shutting anything down. It's about creating a pause between what you feel and what you do. Without that pause, awareness turns into a vulnerability, because the faster you feel, the faster you can be steered. Another major thing is that you take responsibility for other people's reactions. When someone reacts strongly, your first question isn't, "Was that fair?" It's, "What did I do to cause this?" You automatically look inward. You replay your words. You scan for tone. You search for anything you could have done differently. That reflex feels accountable. But it quietly shifts responsibility onto you, even when it doesn't belong there. Empaths are especially sensitive to emotional disruption. If someone becomes distant, irritated, or disappointed, you feel a pull to restore balance. Not because you're guilty, but because unresolved tension feels heavy to you. Carl Jung spoke directly to this internal pressure when he said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Instead of letting others sit with their reactions, you carry them. You smooth things over. You adjust your behavior to make the situation easier for them." And here's where manipulation quietly enters. When someone learns that their reaction changes your behavior, they don't need to explain themselves. They just need to react. A brief coldness, a hint of frustration, a look that suggests you've disappointed them. You respond by giving more, explaining more, or shrinking your needs. Not because they asked, but because you felt responsible. Over time, this creates an uneven dynamic. One person expresses emotion, the other manages it. You stop asking whether the reaction is reasonable. You focus only on making it go away. That's not empathy. That's emotional labor done without consent. And until you separate compassion from responsibility, you'll keep fixing feelings that were never yours to fix. Another thing is, you assume others operate like you. Do you assume people mean what they say because you do? You assume discomfort is accidental because you avoid causing it. You assume clarity will solve things because that's how you operate. That assumption feels fair, but it's also dangerous. Empaths tend to move through interactions with internal consistency. Your words match your intent. Your reactions match your values. So when something feels off, you look for misunderstandings, not strategies. You believe confusion explains behavior better than calculation. Carl Jung warned about this blind spot when he said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Empaths reverse this. Instead of questioning others, they question themselves. You think, if I explain better, this will resolve. If I stay patient, this will settle. If I remain fair, things will balance out. But not everyone plays by internal alignment. Some people test limits. Some people observe reactions. Some people adapt their behavior based on what gives them leverage. And because you can't imagine doing that, you don't look for it. This is how manipulation stays invisible to you. It doesn't feel malicious, it feels confusing. It doesn't feel intentional. It feels messy. You give the benefit of the doubt again and again, not realizing that doubt is what keeps the pattern going. Jung put it plainly. The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. When you assume shared values, you mistake strategy for confusion, and by the time you recognize the pattern, you've already given trust where none was earned. One last thing is, you fear being misunderstood more than being used. Being misunderstood bothers you deeply, not because you need approval, but because clarity matters to you. When someone pulls away or reacts strangely, you don't think, that's their issue. You think, maybe I didn't explain myself well enough. So you talk more. You clarify your intent. You soften your words. You add context that wasn't asked for. That instinct comes from wanting to be fair. But it slowly shifts the balance of power. Carl Jung observed this tendency when he said, The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. Empaths try to define themselves before anyone else can mislabel them. You want to be seen accurately, not reduced to assumptions. But in doing that, you reveal too much. You explain your limits before they're tested. You justify your decisions before they're questioned. You expose what makes you hesitate. Someone who wants influence doesn't need to challenge you directly. They let you do the work for them. And here's the quiet trade you don't notice happening. You choose being understood over being protected. You tolerate small oversteps so you won't seem cold. You delay firm boundaries so you won't seem unfair. You keep engaging so you won't be misread. Over time, being reasonable becomes exhausting, and being used feels subtle because no one ever forced you. You gave access in exchange for clarity, and by the time you realize it, the cost feels higher than the misunderstanding ever would have been. So why manipulation feels subtle to you? Manipulation doesn't announce itself to you. It doesn't come with demands or obvious pressure. It arrives quietly, dressed as normal interaction. That's why it feels hard to name. You don't experience it as control. You experience it as responsibility. A sense that something needs your attention, a feeling that if you don't respond, something will become tense, awkward, or unresolved. Empaths are tuned to emotional undercurrents. So when the atmosphere shifts, you feel compelled to adjust yourself to stabilize it, not because someone asked you to, but because you sensed the imbalance. Carl Jung described this hidden dynamic when he said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking." For empaths, manipulation hides behind what feels like connection. It never looks aggressive. It looks like disappointment, silence, or subtle withdrawal. You don't feel pushed, you feel pulled. And because there's no clear confrontation, your instincts don't activate defense. Instead, you replay the interaction. You analyze tone. You look for what you could do differently next time. That's how control stays invisible. It blends into your own self-reflection. The most unsettling part is that it feels voluntary. You think you're choosing to adapt, but you're responding to cues designed to guide you. Manipulation feels subtle to you because it works with your strengths, your awareness, your responsiveness, your desire for harmony, and when something works through who you are, not against you, it's much harder to recognize where it ends and you begin. Therefore, there is a shift empaths must make. The shift isn't just about spotting manipulation. It's about reclaiming your inner authority. For so long, you've been reacting to emotional currents, adjusting to stabilize others, and explaining yourself to avoid conflict. That instinct feels natural, but it comes at the cost of your energy, clarity, and decision-making. Carl Jung nailed this when he said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." For empaths, this means looking at your own patterns of over-accommodation. It means asking yourself, why do I always fix this? Why do I feel responsible for what isn't mine? When you answer honestly, you begin to see where influence has been slipping in unnoticed. The next step, the real shift, happens when you start pausing before you respond. When a sigh, a look, or a subtle withdrawal triggers that old reflex, you stop yourself. You step back. You analyze, is this my responsibility? Is this my reaction to control? And that pause changes everything. It turns manipulation from invisible pressure into something you can name. It gives you a choice. It gives you power. Once you realize this, empathy stops being a liability. It stops being a door left open for others to walk through. Instead, it becomes your superpower, a way to understand people without giving them control. The hardest part? Starting small. The first boundary, the first refusal, the first moment you put your awareness before automatic reaction. Because once you do, you can never go back to being naive in the same way again. This is where the transformation begins. And the next video, if you're ready, will show exactly how to protect yourself without losing the core of who you are. It's not about losing empathy. It's about using it wisely. Once you make this shift, you'll see relationships, influence, and personal power in a completely new light. So how empaths can spot manipulation. Early. Here's the thing. Once you understand how manipulation works, it's not about paranoia. It's about awareness. It's about noticing the subtle patterns before they take hold. Start paying attention to how interactions make you feel, not just in the moment, but afterward. For example, do you feel drained after a conversation that seemed normal on the surface? Do you leave meetings replaying what you said, wondering if you should have phrased something differently? Do you suddenly feel anxious because someone's tone or body language shifted slightly? Those aren't coincidences. They're signs that someone is subtly influencing your emotional state and your reactions. Notice repetitive patterns. Manipulators rarely rely on a single tactic. They use consistent strategies to test boundaries. A friend or colleague may always sigh or look disappointed when you assert a boundary. You adjust to fix the moment, and that pattern repeats. Someone might ask for favors that seem small at first but gradually grow in scope. You feel obligated because you want to help, not because they demanded it outright. A partner may make casual comments that trigger guilt or self-doubt. You immediately explain yourself or apologize, even when no wrongdoing occurred. Empaths often overlook patterns because each instance feels minor. But the pattern tells the full story. Recognizing it early is key. Ask yourself these questions. Am I adjusting because I want to, or because I feel I have to? Am I explaining myself to be understood, or to prevent discomfort in someone else? Am I giving space because I choose to, or because I feel responsible for their emotions? Here's a situation many empaths experience. You're at work, and a colleague reacts coldly when you suggest an idea. Immediately, you find yourself softening your language in the next meeting to avoid conflict, even though your idea was valid. This small adjustment repeats over weeks. The colleague doesn't overtly control you, but your reflexive response gives them influence. Another common scenario. A friend consistently texts you late at night, venting about stress or problems. You drop what you're doing to respond, feeling responsible for their emotional state. Over time, this pattern consumes your energy, while they learn that their timing and tone will get a response. Carl Jung's wisdom applies here too. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Empaths can turn that insight inward. Recognizing your own reflexes, like taking responsibility too quickly or over-explaining, helps you stop giving away power unconsciously. You can respond intentionally instead of reacting automatically. Here's the subtle power move. Once you see manipulation before it escalates, you can set boundaries calmly, clearly, and early. Say no to extra tasks at work without guilt, knowing your yes will otherwise be exploited. Limit time with someone who repeatedly drains your energy without feeling responsible for their frustration. Pause before explaining yourself in situations that trigger guilt. You don't owe justification for protecting your own space. When you do this, Empathy transforms into strength, not vulnerability. Emotional intelligence becomes self-protection, and you finally stop being an easy target. Now that you can spot manipulation, the next step is learning to protect yourself consistently. The goal isn't to become cold or distant. It's to create space where your empathy works for you, not against you. Start with small, clear boundaries, like time boundaries. If someone's venting or asking for your attention at a moment when you can't fully engage, say something like, "I want to be here for you, but I need to focus right now. Can we talk later?" Also, emotional boundaries. When someone's tone triggers guilt or anxiety, pause before responding. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, is this my responsibility to fix? Another thing is information boundaries. You don't need to share everything about yourself to be kind or connected. Protect your thoughts and feelings until you're sure they'll be respected. Empaths often over-explain to avoid conflict. Here's the trick. Clarity is stronger than justification. You can communicate limits without over-apologizing or over-explaining. I can't take that on right now. I need some space to think before responding. Recognize manipulative patterns early, like repeated guilt-tripping, subtle withdrawal, or passive pressure. Instead of reacting emotionally, respond strategically. Pause, reflect, and decide if engagement is necessary. Respond calmly and assertively, without emotional overcompensation. Keep your focus on your needs and energy, not just theirs. Here's a real-world example. Imagine a coworker subtly pressures you to cover extra work every week. Instead of automatically saying yes, you pause and evaluate, am I obligated? Or am I being influenced by guilt? Then you respond, I can't take that on this week, but I can help plan a solution for next week. This does two things. You honor your boundaries. You maintain your empathy without letting it be exploited. Carl Jung's insight fits perfectly here. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Building boundaries is how empaths reclaim that privilege. It's how you keep your strength while still caring deeply. And it's how you stop being easy to manipulate without ever losing the qualities that make you uniquely powerful. Here's the truth. Empathy is your superpower, but only if you control how it's used. Being sensitive doesn't make you weak. It makes you aware. It makes you perceptive. It makes you capable of seeing things others can't. The problem isn't empathy itself. It's how often it's unguarded. Once you spot manipulation early and set clear boundaries, you transform every interaction. You stay present without being drained. You care deeply without overextending yourself. You respond instead of reacting. Think of it this way. Before, your empathy was like an open door. Now, it's a filter. You let in what's genuine. You keep out what's controlling. Carl Jung said it best. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. For empaths, looking inside means understanding your patterns, your reflexes to guilt, pressure, and emotional responsibility, and choosing a different response. You're not closing your heart, you're claiming it. Here's the part most empaths miss. This isn't a one-time adjustment, it's a practice. Every conversation, every interaction is a chance to reinforce boundaries, spot influence, and act with clarity. And once you do it consistently, you'll notice something incredible. People respect you more because you respect yourself. You feel less drained, more confident, and in control of your energy. You finally experience empathy as a strength, not a vulnerability. Remember, every interaction is a chance to practice this skill. The more you honor your feelings while protecting your energy, the stronger and more confident you become.